Hello, hello. Happy Saturday night. How you doing? I hope you're all very well. We are well. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hi, Kay again. Kay says, I wish the Dems would do a lot, all of them. Kevin St. Ford says, great title, Joe. Thanks, Kevin. And Amber says, good evening, my lovelies. My daughter Leanne turned 18 today and graduates next week. Well, congratulations, Amber, and congratulations to your daughter. It's a great age, 18. It really is a great age. Hope she's going to have a wonderful life to look forward to. Carmen says, here to share and invite. Greetings. Dolores says, from her YouTube perch, hi, everyone. Carmen says, doing well, thanks. Glad to hear it, Carmen. That's very, very important. Please do as much as you can to share tonight. I've got some pretty stiff competition. We're talking about subjects that are very important. The subject we're talking about here tonight is currently the most important subject to talk about. As you'll see, as we wend our way through this live stream. And Bennett Hoffman, nice to see you, Bennett, and welcome. I haven't actually noticed you before, but you are very, very welcome indeed. Thanks for coming. Okay, so let's begin with an impeccable piece of logic from a piece in the Huffington Post. I thought persons quoted in this piece were really very explicit, and the compelling logic of what they had to say is something we ought to take note of. The headline, Major Kirsten Sinema supporter says abolish filibuster or get out of the Senate. This appeared June 4th, 2021, and it's by Amanda Turkle, who is sometimes a very trenchant commentator. And there she is, Kirsten Sinema herself, who has repeatedly said she opposes abolishing the filibuster. Former Arizona Attorney General Grant Woods, who prominently backed Kirsten Sinema's election to the Senate, is now saying she doesn't belong in office anymore unless she helps abolish the filibuster. Woods, a former Republican, was Attorney General from 1991 to 99 and worked for the late Senator John McCain, Republican. In 2018, he switched parties and became a Democrat. That year, he endorsed Sinema. The campaign even featured him in one of its ads, saying, quote, we need more people who are not just politicians, who will say or do anything to get elected, unquote. But on Friday, Woods was much less enthusiastic about Sinema. In comments to HuffPost, he said he feels very strongly about passage of H.R. 1, which is the For the People Act, that the Democrats are putting forward. It's a democracy reform and voting rights bill, and believes the Senate must abolish the filibuster, of course, so H.R. 1 can pass, which is something Sinema said she is adamantly against. Sinema is, however, a co-sponsor of the For the People Act. Quote, from Woods again. Quote, I do think that Senator Sinema and every senator should support ending the filibuster for the voting rights bill to keep the Jim Crow filibuster while losing some of these basic voting rights that are central to our democracy is preposterous. I thought that statement really reveals the compelling logic that there is to this particular situation. The senators who will not support ending the filibuster in order to pass things like H.R. 1, H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the PRO Act, people like that are putting the filibuster before democracy, and especially with respect to H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, in keeping the filibuster, they would be sacrificing, as Wood said, the basic voting rights that are central to our democracy. The conflict is the filibuster on the one hand, democracy on the other. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema can't have both. Going on with the article, quote, Senator Sinema should know that. So should Senator Manchin, Wood said, referring to West Virginia Senate Democrat Joe Manchin, who also opposes removing the filibuster. Quote again, at the end of the day, I'm very hopeful that they'll come around and do the right thing. But if they don't, then I don't think they belong in the Senate anymore, unquote. Woods also tweeted his thoughts about the filibuster on Thursday without directly naming Sinema. At the end of the day, if you don't vote to protect voting rights and save our democracy by breaking the Jim Crow filibuster, it should be your last vote as a United States Senator. No exceptions. Hashtag country first, hashtag filibuster, hashtag end the filibuster. Sinema's office did not immediately return a request for comment, says Amanda Turkle. Until now, Woods has been a strong defender of Sinema. In March, when Sinema received widespread Democratic criticism for voting against the $15 an hour minimum wage with an exaggerated thumbs down, Woods stood by her. But this week, Sinema reiterated her refusal to abolish the filibuster, which remains a major impediment to passing much of Joe Biden's agenda. Quote, it is a tool that protects the democracy of our nation, unquote, Sinema said Tuesday in Tucson at an event with Senator John Cornyn, a Republican of Texas. Why is she at an event with Senator John Cornyn, I wonder? Quote, rather than allowing our country to ricochet wildly every 2 to 4 years back and forth between policies, the idea of the filibuster was created by those who came before to create comedy and to encourage bipartisanship and work together. Now, that is a lie. The first use of the filibuster was actually by John C. Calhoun for the purpose of protecting slavery in the South. Going on with the article. But as New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg noted Friday, Sinema's history is inaccurate. I guess I just noted that too, right? Quote, the filibuster was created by mistake when the Senate, cleaning up its rule book in 1806, failed to include a provision to cut off debate. A so-called cloture rule allowing two-thirds of senators to end the filibuster was adopted in 1917. The proportion was reduced to 3/5 in 1975. That's where we get the present 60 votes. The filibuster encouraged extremism, not comedy. It was a favorite tool of pro-slavery senators before the Civil War and segregationists after it, unquote. Goldberg wrote. Last week, Republicans successfully filibustered their first piece of legislation of the Biden administration. They blocked the formation of a bipartisan independent commission to investigate the January 6th Capitol riot, the one that most people call an insurrection, or at least many people call, an insurrection. So, central point of that is the logic of the trade-off between the filibuster and the For the People Act. Protecting democracy versus abolishing the filibuster. That's a choice. That's Sinema and Joe Manchin and others who may join them on the Democratic side have to make. They can't have it both ways. They can have democracy or they can have the filibuster. It is up to them. Now we move on to the parliamentarian. Oh, Dolores says, I love seeing you everywhere. Thank you, Dolores. Carmen says, Sinema's inaccurate. Oust her before she helps oust democracy. And Steve says, hello, Dolores. I see you everywhere. Steve Wolfbrand is here now, by the way. And Holly Horn is here. HR 1 merits full discussion. Not during this particular live stream, I'm afraid. I won't have time for that. I have to get to things more important than the many objections to HR 1. Steve says, hello, Kay. And Kay says, I don't hate you, Steve. I love you, buddy. Steve says, just joking. And he says, hello, Dolores. I see you everywhere. Kay asks, Evelina Apont, are you coming tonight? Yes, we need you, Evelina. Anyway, next, we're going to skip to parliamentarian shenanigans. Except they're more than shenanigans. They are deadly games for the people of this country that the parliamentarian is playing. So Punchbowl reported, you're seeing Punchbowl now. Punchbowl News, AM reported, I'm skipping to the parliamentarian, as the Senate was leaving town last Friday for the Memorial Day recess, parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough quietly issued a new ruling on a key issue driving legislating in Washington right now. Can Democrats use the same budget resolution twice to trigger the fast track the reconciliation process? Well, that's an interesting question. But I don't think McDonough's ruling on that key issue is legislating in Washington right now. What is driving legislating in Washington right now is the unwillingness of the Democrats to consider Ms. McDonough as simply an advisor to the senators, whose rulings do not have the force of law, whose rulings can be entirely ignored. Her ruling would not be big news today. It would be a footnote if her ruling on the first reconciliation bill with regard to the minimum wage of $15 per hour had been ignored. If the Democrats had set the precedent right then and there that we're happy to listen to Ms. McDonough's advice, to the parliamentarians' advice, that's what she's there for, to advise us, but this is our decision. And we think, as CBO thinks, that the minimum wage of $15 per hour would have a major impact on the federal budget. CBO ruled that way. And it's apparent to anyone with a sense of reason that it would have a major impact on the budget. And so was legitimately included within the American Rescue Plan. Democrats could have decided that. But Chuck Schumer did not. He bowed to the parliamentarian. Why? Because the president said he respected the parliamentarian. The issue is not respecting the parliamentarian. The issue is whether you're going to let the parliamentarian make the decision or you're going to make the decision yourself. Can Democrats use the same budget resolution twice to trigger the fast-track reconciliation process? According to McDonough, the answer is yes, but it's not that easy. And it may impact what happens to the American Jobs Plan and American Family Plan this summer. According to Hill sources, McDonough's decision would allow Democrats to use Section 304 of the 1974 Budget Act to create multiple reconciliation bills within one fiscal year. Now, that's not really true. There would be a reconciliation bill, which, however, could be amended in the same fiscal year. So there's a bill, and then there are amendments. There are revisions that are allowed under Section 304. Going on with the article, these reconciliation bills would get through the Senate on a simple majority vote rather than needing 60 votes to overcome a GOP filibuster, such as the Democrats did for the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan in March. We knew this was the outline of what the parliamentarian ruled a few months ago. However, there are limits to what Democrats can do. That is, according to the parliamentarian. And this is the news, says Punchbowl. The majority party in this case, the Democrats, cannot use reconciliation simply to avoid the regular legislative process. And there have to be reasons beyond political expediency for triggering the majority threshold, such as economic downturn. In other words, the parliamentarian says, Dems can't use this as a shortcut. Now, I think that conclusion is unwarranted by the preceding sentence or two in the paragraph. And that is to say, well, here are some problems. The first problem, excuse me a second. Devor? Mm-hmm. Your clicking on that can be heard here.
Okay.
So please move into the other room, if you would. The majority party, in this case the Democrats, cannot use reconciliation simply to avoid the regular legislative process. There have to be reasons beyond political expediency for triggering the majority threshold. This is not in the reconciliation bill. It's not in the Budget Act. It's not in the reconciliation rules. The reconciliation rules refer to spending having a budgetary impact, taxing having a budgetary impact, and legislation about the debt limit. That's what they refer to. There's nothing there that says there have to be reasons beyond political expediency for triggering the majority threshold. Think about it for a moment. Why would the majority party want to use reconciliation in the first place? Why was reconciliation legislated in the first place? Because it was a way to get around the filibuster with respect to the budget. Because the senators at that time did not want the whole budgetary process to be frozen and to be deadlocked just because of the filibuster threshold. They didn't want to get rid of the filibuster, but they wanted to provide a way around it at that time. But what is a way around it except the political expediency for triggering the majority threshold? The purpose was so that it would be possible to legislate a budget. Is there any reason to believe that the first use of a reconciliation bill, which the parliamentarian admits can be revised using Section 304, that the first use can be for reasons of political expediency, where the revision cannot be for political expediency? Where is that written? Where is that implied in Section 304? Where is it implied anywhere? But then, there have to be reasons for triggering the majority threshold, such as an economic downturn. Are we not in an economic downturn? We still have COVID. The economy is not yet operating on all cylinders. We are coming out of a downturn, but we're still in the downturn, and we don't know whether the downturn may turn the other way again at any point, because it doesn't have the new spending that would be coming out of the revision of the first reconciliation bill. We're still in the COVID emergency, which is also an economic emergency. So there is a reason beyond political expediency for triggering the majority threshold. It's to avoid the possibility of going down again, of having the downturn not continue to be relieved by a growing economy. But it's to avoid a possible stall in that economy during the summer months and during the fall months, which would put people out of work again. But there's the conclusion. In other words, the parliamentarian said Dems can't use this as a shortcut. No, that's not what the parliamentarian said. She said there have to be reasons, such as an economic downturn. Anyway, Punch Bowl goes on. In addition, Democrats would have to start the process from the beginning if they want to pass more than one reconciliation bill. That means going back to the House and Senate budget panels, passing essentially new budget resolutions and bringing them to the floor. In the case of the Senate, this means a vote-a-rama for each budget resolution. Democrats would be potentially exposing their vulnerable members, such as Senators Mark Kelly of Arizona and Maggie Hassan of New Mexico, to tough votes on politically themed amendments offered by Republicans. But look, this just happened with the first version of the reconciliation bill. So why would the vote-a-rama be a problem? Why would it be a problem for further revisions of the reconciliation bill? Are Mark Kelly and Maggie Hassan any more vulnerable now than they were in March? I mean, it's only the beginning of June. We don't have an election till November 2022. Why would their votes on the infrastructure bill, on the American Jobs Plan and the American Family Plan, why would their votes on those bills be particularly troublesome for them? Why is that a problem? Would it be better if they don't have those votes and the Democrats don't get those through Congress? Okay, and nothing happens? Is that going to be better for Mark Kelly and for Maggie Hassan? Somehow I doubt it. Would it be better for them if the economy did not keep getting better but began to sink again because that extra federal spending wasn't coming out to buoy up the economy? Would that be better for Mark Kelly and Maggie Hassan? Or would it tell their constituents that they failed to deliver? I think this vote-a-rama objection is simply nonsense. None of this, to go on with the article, would be impossible for Democrats to do, but there are still many questions about how it would work and what impact it would have on the Senate. Republicans, of course, would go ballistic over this, so it would be a huge political risk. Why would that be a political risk? The Republicans go ballistic whenever the Democrats do anything. They go ballistic all the time whenever Democrats try to do good things for constituents. Why is it a huge political risk? The infrastructure bill, the American Jobs Plan, and the American Family Plan are both going to deliver needed boosts to the economy of the United States. Neither bill is perfect. I wish the bills were big. They're far too small, far too timid. But the idea that Democrats should be deterred from doing this because the Republicans are going to go ballistic. Who cares? They don't have 51 votes. Let them go ballistic. I think the Democrats went ballistic when the Republicans passed the tax cut for business in the Trump administration. Every Democrat voted against it. And the Democrats went ballistic over it, running all kinds of ads. What kind of a political risk was that for the Republicans? They didn't care. They passed what their supporters wanted them to pass, which is that big tax cut. Now it's up to the Democrats to do the same thing, to give their supporters something that will help them. Senate Democrats had little to say on the ruling's impact or how it might affect their strategy moving forward. According to a Senate Democrat aide briefed on timing, we're planning to move forward with infrastructure in July, and we're weighing all the options. Yes, The options include, of course, ignoring the parliamentarian and even firing the parliamentarian. I'm not for firing the parliamentarian. I'm not for doing that at all. She's an advisor. If you don't think she's a good advisor, then fire her, because just because she advised in a way you don't like doesn't mean that she's not a good advisor. I'm not for firing the woman. Just take the responsibility in your own hands. For every member of the Senate, the decision whether to listen to the parliamentarian or not is their decision. For the Vice President of the United States, the decision whether to take the advice of the parliamentarian is her decision. For the President of the United States, who presumably will tell the Vice President what he would like her to do, it is his decision. For years in the Senate, the rulings of the parliamentarian were just ignored by senators who wanted to ignore them. Nobody felt an obligation to take the advice of the parliamentarian. The people talking about some obligation are introducing some BS that never existed before. And the proof is that when the Republicans didn't like what a perfectly fine parliamentarian was telling them in 2001 and 2003, they fired the parliamentarian and got themselves another whose advice they liked better. All right? That was a Republican thing to do. Fire the guy. Fire the gal. I don't think Democrats should do that. But I think they should just take the damn responsibility and make the decision that their constituents want them to make. Anyway, going on with the article, this is in line with what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said publicly. He wants an infrastructure bill done in July, where the Democrats can pass that, and what this latest parliamentarian ruling means will all unfold in the next 8 weeks or so. That is certainly true. That is what's going to happen. Now, there's been a lot of commentary on what the parliamentarian, a number of articles on that subject very quickly. I don't think I'll bother to share them. On June 2nd, 2021, parliamentarian erects new obstacle to Biden's agenda. This was a piece, by Eric Levitz in the Intelligencer, that's New York Magazine. And I'm going to go through a couple of important points from that. Levitt says, historically, there's been one more critical limitation to reconciliation. He had mentioned previously, it has to emerge from a budget resolution passed through the House and Senate budget panels. 2, has to survive a vote-a-rama. And 3, be composed entirely of provisions that have a non-incidental impact on the federal budget. Historically, there has been one more critical limitation to budget reconciliation. It could only be used once in a fiscal year. This is not true. It has never been true. There can be 3 bills implementing a budget resolution. As many as 3 bills. There can be one bill concerned with spending. There can be one bill concerned with raising revenue, and there can be another bill concerned with the debt limit. Now, some people will say, and it's been said in some of these articles here, that as a practical matter, okay, if you're going to be concerned with raising revenue, you can't really pass a raising revenue bill without having some implications for spending. So maybe the spending and the revenue raising has to occur in the same bill. But that still means that there can be two bills. That is, one for the spending and the taxing, and a second one for the debt limit. Okay. So it's not true that it can only be used once in a fiscal year, even without the parliamentarians' recent ruling. Okay. And Democrats have already burned through 2021's with Joe Biden's COVID relief bill, says Levitz. But in April, Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough, the supreme authority on budget reconciliation rules, and here Levitz puts in a parenthetical remark that's very important. So long as there aren't 50 Democratic senators willing to overrule or fire her. They don't have to fire her, they can just overrule her. Declared that this wasn't necessarily true. Chuck Schumer asked McDonough whether Congress could pass two reconciliation bills in a single year by revising its first reconciliation bill to authorize the drafting of a second. Or similarly eye-glazing nonsense, says Levitz. And McDonough said yes, although certain terms and conditions would likely apply. Democrats celebrated the first half of the parliamentarians' answer, largely ignoring the latter bit. The party proceeded from the assumption it could use reconciliation to pass a partisan infrastructure bill this summer if bipartisan negotiations broke down. But on the Friday before Memorial Day, the parliamentarian revealed the fine print beneath her ruling. According to Punch Bowl rules, McDonough found Democrats could only pass a second reconciliation bill if the party revises its previous budget resolution for a legitimate reason, e.g., because an unforeseen economic downturn changed the nation's budgetary needs, rather than merely to avoid the regular legislative process for the sake of political expediency. It's worth noting that these quotes do not derive from a publicly available ruling, but rather from Punch Bowl's paraphrase of Senate staffers' paraphrase of McDonough's ruling. As reported, though, says Levitz, it is difficult to understand how this matter could be adjudicated objectively. How will the parliamentarian go about determining whether Democrats are expediting a jobs bill to address a slower than anticipated recovery, or merely doing so for the sake of political expediency? Also, McDonough stipulated that a second reconciliation bill would be subject to the same arduous legislative process as the first, even if it did derive from a previously enacted budget resolution. Which is to say, Democrats can't jump right to voting on a partisan infrastructure bill, but would need to pass it through congressional committees and an open amendment process. Taken together, these conditions likely foreclose the passage of a partisan infrastructure bill before the fall. I keep hearing this, but I've never understood this. The first reconciliation bill, from the time they started working on it at the end of January, took 45 days to get through. That's all. Just 45 days. I don't see why this second one should be any different. And as far as the political expediency is concerned, it seems to me that we're coming to another crisis. We're coming to a debt ceiling crisis on July 31st. So there's a crisis. There needs to be another reconciliation bill to get around the crisis. Or to put this in another way, in a proper way, there needs to be a revision of the overcome that on July 31st. Because otherwise, you won't be able to spend the money that was appropriated in the first reconciliation bill. Seems to me that's a legitimate reason for going to a revision. And of course, as I said before, there's no reason why this should take more than 45 days from the time that Mr. Biden decides that he wants to quit join with the Republicans and get to passing the reconciliation to win elections in 2022. Because, of course, to win those elections, he's going to have to pass the American Jobs Plan and the American Family Plan, and he might even have to expand both of those bills. And he needs to act while he still has 50 Democratic senators. I don't want to be gruesome about this, but one of them, God forbid, could die tomorrow. He doesn't have the time he's taking to negotiate with people who are not negotiating with him in good faith for other reasons that we're going to get to. Taken together, these conditions likely foreclose the passage of partisan infrastructure. I just don't agree with that. That's press bullshit. The White House negotiations with Senate Republicans have dragged on longer than anticipated. Levitt says, even if Democrats broke off those negotiations tomorrow, they would still have a lot of internal bargaining to do before producing a bill agreeable to Senate moderates and House progressives alike. So get to it. Break off the negotiations tomorrow and get to the real job of getting the 50 Democrat votes in line. Now McDonough has given Democrats an excuse to procrastinate. The new fiscal year begins in October, at which point Schumer and company won't have to worry about proving their reconciliation bill isn't motivated by political expediency. And Levitz correctly says that requirement only pertains to the second reconciliation bill of a given fiscal year for some stupid reason. In fact, no reason was given by McDonough as to why the second one can't be done for political expediency, while the first can be done for political expediency, or at least why that issue was never raised with the first one. Now the point is made that this increases the likelihood of Democrats combining the bulk of Biden's jobs and families plan into a single reconciliation bill to be passed in the fall, which might not be a bad thing from a progressive perspective, but it might be a bad thing. The economy could stall between now and then. Liberal Democrats have long been skeptical. And by the way, July 31st comes a debt ceiling crisis. What are the Republicans going to do then? What kinds of cuts are they going to demand from the Democrats because of the debt ceiling crisis? Liberal Democrats have long been skeptical of Biden's decision to split his Build Back Better agenda into two bills. Right, I've been skeptical of that too. I didn't see any reason for that. If Democrats are forced to put everything into a single bill, then moderates will either need to acquiesce to progressive priorities or risk sabotaging their own. That is true. That is a good point. All this said, the outcome of bipartisan negotiations over infrastructure will have a greater impact on the legislative landscape than McDonough's ruling. and whether it's worth taking a half loaf from Senate Republicans for bipartisanship's sake is one question Democrats can't outsource to the parliamentarian. Yes, that's true. But they can't outsource this to the parliamentarian either. They've tried, but it isn't credible. If they don't pass these bills, they will get the blame, not the parliamentarian. There's that old song. He deserves the credit. He deserves the blame. Nikolai Ivanovich Lubachevsky is his name. Hi. Biden's going to deserve the credit. He's going to deserve the blame. And Joseph Robinette Biden is his name. Hi. Another one about the parliamentarian. And by the way, before I get into that one, I think it's time to make the point. It's time to make the point. What do these senators really believe? What do they really think? Do they believe, along with former Attorney General Woods, Arizona, that there's a choice between the filibuster on the one hand and democracy on the other? Because if they do accept that, if that's the choice facing Manchin and Sinema, it's also the choice that is facing every Democratic senator. Every single one of them. And if they have to get rid of the filibuster anyway, because they believe the filibuster is illegitimate and the democracy is more important than the filibuster, then the same principle should apply with respect to the parliamentarian. That is to say, if you believe the filibuster, is illegitimate, then every piece of legislation designed to keep the filibuster or to facilitate the filibuster is also illegitimate. And what is reconciliation about anyway? What is it about? It is a way of keeping the filibuster. Yes, it was a way of moderating the filibuster, but it was a compromise bill to keep the filibuster, which had been paralyzing the Senate from time to time. It was a way to keep the filibuster and still not be completely paralyzed by it. So if the filibuster is illegitimate, reconciliation itself is illegitimate. And if reconciliation itself is illegitimate, then the advice of the parliamentarian with respect to reconciliation is beside the point. Now, as a practical matter, what this means is that the way Democrats should be looking at what the parliamentarian is doing and the way they should be dealing with the parliamentarian is to look at what she is doing as playing an illegitimate game. Illegitimate because it is part of the fruits of the filibuster. It is there to protect the filibuster. So what Democrats should be doing is trying to use any means at their disposal to simply get around what the parliamentarian has to say and get to legislating with 51 votes. That should be their objective in playing this game. And what do they have to do to reach that objective in playing this game. All they have to do is say, thank you very much for your advice. For your advice, Ms. McDonough. We value it very highly. But in this case, since it's our decision, we're not going to take it. Senate parliamentarian creates new obstacle for Democrats' infrastructure plan. It's not a new obstacle. The obstacle is the old obstacle of the Democrats deciding to try to legislate in accordance with what the Senate parliamentarian has to say. Okay, remember what Levitt said, okay, in his article. He said, how would the parliamentarian tell objectively whether the Democrats were passing a second reconciliation bill or a revision, anyway, of a resolution for reasons of expediency rather than a legitimate reason? How would she objectively evaluate that? There is no way she could objectively evaluate that. It just can't happen. So it's the Democrats' decision anyway. They can call something a reconciliation bill. They can put stuff into that particular reconciliation bill. And if the parliamentarian advises during a point of order proceeding that she doesn't think this should be included inside of the reconciliation bill, the Republicans would still have to win a point of order vote on that. And the decider on a point of order vote would be the vice president. So if the Democrats make the decision, then the Republicans lose on that particular point, okay, of order vote. So you can see it is the Democrats' decision in any case. So, earlier this year, the parliamentarian gave Democrats a perceived win. By the way, this second article is in Truth Out, written by Chris Walker on June 4th. I'm skipping through it a little quickly now. Last Friday, McDonough seemed to reverse her earlier decision. She clarified that amendments could not be added on if they had nothing to do with the original bill. She also ruled that legislation could not be passed in a quick manner, but that amendments would have to go through the same congressional committee process in order to pass. Well, how is she going to evaluate whether the amendments, the new amendments, have nothing to do with the original bill? If these new amendments are all about goosing the economy, they certainly will have a lot to do with the American Rescue Plan. They could have been included in a single larger bill under the title of the American Rescue Plan. The whole infrastructure bill could have been included. The whole American Families Plan bill could have been included as part of the American Rescue Plan to rescue the economy from the damage done by COVID. The only reason why that couldn't happen was because Biden didn't have the bills ready. So if there was ever a reason to revise the original bill, to call this a revision, it was that they didn't have time in the original reconciliation bill, which had to be quickly passed, to include all these other important things, which were part of the objectives of the American Rescue Plan. So it does have something to do with the original bill. According to reporting from the Hill, that would include, in other words, the idea, that amendments would have to go through the same congressional committee process in order to pass. According to reporting from the Hill, that would include going through the Senate Budget Committee, which is currently split evenly between the two parties. It is currently split evenly between the two parties, but it was evenly split between the two parties when the first budget resolution was written. So how did it get out of the Budget Committee then? I don't know. I'm just asking. But Bernie Sanders managed it then with an even split between the two parties. Does that mean that Mitch doesn't have control of all of the Republican senators on that committee? That means that any amendment proposed to the last reconciliation bill would need at least one Republican senator to join with Democrats to pass each aspect of the finalized bill. No. That's not what it means. Because what the Budget Committee does is write a revision to the original resolution that it wrote. And that resolution did not contain a bill. It contained generalized instructions that were compatible with the House's generalized instruction. The article is confusing the specific amendments passed to the last reconciliation bill for the generalized instructions that would go out from the committee. If Bernie can write those instructions in a sufficiently generalized way to match with the House, if he could get it through the first time, he should be able to get it through the second time. And by the way, why isn't this particular objection equally compelling with respect to a reconciliation bill that would be passed in fiscal 2022, in October 2021? Just how many months is it from now? June, July, August, September. Just 4 months from now, and a little fraction. They'll be working on another budget resolution. And the Budget Committee will be probably similarly split evenly between the two parties. So why is it nobody is saying, oh, they're going to have a terrible time getting a budget resolution out in the fall? Nobody is raising that objection. So why does that come in as an objection here? No. I think the Democrats can easily get a revision of the original resolution, just like they got the original resolution through. Now, any specific amendment proposed to another reconciliation bill that would be compatible with the instructions doesn't need one Republican on the Budget Committee, because any new bills would be written in other committees, not in the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee doesn't write the actual bills. It just writes the resolution. Chris Walker doesn't seem to know that. So, that conclusion, that would need at least one Republican senator to join with Democrats to pass each aspect of the finalized bill, which could result in some parts being passed and others not. That's nonsense. In order to get an infrastructure bill passed this summer, President Joe Biden has signaled a willingness to cooperate with Republicans, including potentially cutting his original. Yeah, he wrote that. There's a lot of speculation on why he did that. There's all kinds of, manipulations that are going on. But the basic point in the end is that what's holding them up now is this quest for bipartisanship, which the American people do not care about, versus what you could pass. If you passed a reconciliation bill with everything Biden wanted in the $2.3 trillion bill, and then you added to it a further stimulus check, a further survival check as part of the American Rescue Plan. Notice that further check would have something to do with the American Rescue Plan, would it not? Let's say that cost another $650 million. I forget what the figure is exactly. Who cares? Include it in that bill. Then do all your infrastructure in that revision bill, and the whole family's plan in that revision bill. That would make that revision bill about $4.7 trillion. And let the Republicans go ballistic over it. Pass it quickly. Send out those extra stimulus checks quickly and make them $2,000 checks this time, so nobody can say Biden broke his promise. Get that to people. They won't give a damn whether you pass that with bipartisanship or not. Nobody's going to give a damn. I don't give a damn. My family doesn't give a damn. Nobody I know gives a damn. Who do you know who gives a damn? Put that proposition to them. See if they give a damn. Nobody's going to give a damn. The American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan, this is a quote from the article. Actually a quote from Ethan Winter, which is in the article. The American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan are overwhelmingly popular and voters support passing both together through reconciliation. Ethan Winter, a senior analyst at Data for Progress, said the truth out, quote again, a majority of voters also want Republicans to work with Biden on passing these bills, rather than simply trying to impede the Democratic Party's legislative agenda. So what you do is they want the Republicans to work with the Democrats. So now you cut off negotiations and say, we couldn't come to agreement with the Republicans because they were too unreasonable about wanting to pass things the American people need. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pass a revision of the American Rescue Plan. And the way we're going to revise it is we're going to include the American Family Plan, we're going to include the American Jobs Plan, and we're going to include $2,000 checks, another round of $2,000 checks for everybody in the country. That's what we're going to pass. And we're going to get it done by July 31st. And we are following the reconciliation instructions. We are going to put this bill into Ron Wyden's, the Financial Services Committee in the Senate. And we're going to commit it to that committee. And they're going to work on the reconciliation bill. But by the way, first, we're going to have the House write the revision bill. And then we're going to take that bill to the Senate. And we may not refer it to any committee. We can use expedited procedures in the Senate to avoid sending it to any committee other than it had already gone through the first committee, the Budget Committee, to revise the instructions. But we're not going to send the bill to any other committee in the Senate after that and take the time to discharge it from that committee, we're going to put the House bill to a floor vote in the Senate without change by Chuck Schumer, okay, or anybody else. And we'll have our votorama. Here comes the votorama. It's going to take 2 days, and that's it. And we're going to pass this bill by July 31st. And by the way, this revision bill is going to have a provision about the debt limit in it. It's also going to have the repeal of the debt limit in it. We're not going to have the debt limit anymore. It's going to be gone. Bye-bye debt limit. That's what we're going to do. So, next on the parliamentarian, I got to get through the parliamentarian because I got a lot more to do tonight. I'm biting off a whole big chunk tonight. But did I get rid of something I needed to go through? I've been through Truth Out, I've been through Punch Bowl, I've been through Levitz, right? So this is the last bill that I want to go through, which I think I will share with you. This is from Salon. Senate parliamentarian surprise decision threatens structure plan. And you know most of this song already, so I'm not going to go through it. McDonough's new ruling states Democrats cannot automatically discharge a revision to the 2021 by resolution, budget resolution from the budget committee, meaning they would need at least one Republican on the evenly split panel to back the vote. Now, this is correct. This evidently is about having a vote on the revision to the resolution. But maybe they're not going to need a revision to the resolution. They don't need a revision to the resolution Let's see, why would they need a revision to the resolution? Okay, I come back to my first point on this, which is if Bernie could get it through the Republicans on the budget committee the first time around, why wouldn't he be able to get through a revision this time around? There must be a way, in case of a tie vote, for him to discharge the revisions of the instructions from the committee. Because if there wasn't a way to do that, there wouldn't have been a way for him to get through the original budget resolution instructions from the budget committee in the first place. I'm pretty sure, that I'm right about that. Okay, then the article brings up the political expediency bit again. So McDonough Parliamentarian cited a 1974 conference report saying that revisions to an existing budget resolution should be reserved for situations like sharp revisions in the revenue or spending estimates or major developments in the economy. Well, okay. There's a major development in the economy. Okay, and that is that in the judgment of the Democrats, the economy is not recovering fast enough, and it needs further stimulus through the American Jobs Plan and through the American Families Plan. So that would be the judgment of the majority. How is McDonough going to deny that or gainsay it? I mean, she's not an expert on how the economy is going. She has no expertise, okay, in that area particularly. So there might need to be substantial revisions in the spending estimates. Okay. And as far as the revenue estimates are concerned, the debt ceiling crisis coming up on July 31st suggests that if people are unwilling to get rid of the debt ceiling law as part of the revision of the bill, then there are going to have to be sharp changes in the revenue aspect of the reconciliation bill. Specifically, in order to bring in more money to allow the appropriation to be spent by by the executive branch after July 31st, there's going to have to be a lot more tax revenue coming in very, very, very quickly, right? So there has to be a revision of the American Rescue Plan to take care of that problem. Now, but what exactly the revision is, well, we don't know. It's going to be part of the specific bill, but it has to address the debt ceiling problem. She also cited the late Senator Muskie of Maine, who said that revised budget should be the exception and not the rule, and should be reserved to meet changed conditions, not take account of matters which might have been considered in connection with the budget resolution most recently adopted by Congress. Well, so they didn't consider the debt ceiling crisis of July 31st, because how could they anticipate, okay, that the Republicans weren't going to want to do anything about the debt ceiling crisis? But now we know, based on their actions, that they're not going to do anything to facilitate the presidency of Joe Biden. So this is what is now going to require a revision to the instructions. I think that's all you have to say, or words to that effect. She said the potential for abuse was clear in 1974 and is all the more obvious now. And look, she might be right when it comes to that part of it. But, again, if you think the filibuster is illegitimate in the first place, and the fruits of the filibuster, the reconciliation bill, okay, the reconciliation, okay, activity that was conceived in the Budget Act of 1974, that was implemented, okay, in 1980, that whole pattern of rules is supporting the continued existence of the filibuster, and therefore, okay, is illegitimate. In other words, it itself is an abuse. That's what I'm contending here. So the abuse of an abuse is not an abuse, is what I'm saying. We are overusing and over-relying on a hyper-fast-track procedure because the Senate is not working. It doesn't operate in a deliberative fashion anymore. When someone opposes a bill, they do not deliberate about the bill. They have a staffer sending an email saying they're filibustering it. That has destroyed the deliberative Senate. That is the reality. That is the abuse. The filibuster is the abuse. So what do? As long as the filibuster is in place, as long as they're hesitating to get rid of it, using the nuclear option, what you do is you play whatever games you have to play to get through reconciliation. If that game is to ignore the parliamentarians' advice, you just ignore the parliamentarians' advice. You pass a reconciliation bill with the 51-50 margin that you have. And if the Republicans don't like it, they can throw their temper tantrum. If you give the public an extra $2,000 check, none of us will care. In fact, while you're at it, why don't you just pass $2,000 a month for as long as COVID lasts? Then nobody's going to care whether it's bipartisan or not. Now, let's get to the really important issue, which the filibuster is causing. The really important issue that, is going on. I'll be running a little late tonight. So if you can stay, great. If you can't stay, then that's okay. The video will be available afterwards. This is a piece by Umar Haque, not sure how to pronounce his name, on June 2nd. GOP has a plan to end America, but the Dems don't have one to stop them. See all these bullets? And then there's kind of an American flag bullet. At this grim juncture in American history, three things are becoming clear. One, the GOP has been taken over from top to bottom by Trumpists. It belongs to them now as an institution. Two, it is committed to the extremist goal of destroying democracy, but by whatever means necessary. By the way, folks, including preventing the Democrats from passing H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. Three, a plan, plot, strategy, call it what you like, is emerging to get the job done. And it's probably going to succeed at the rate things are going. Are you listening, Joe Biden? Why do I say that? Because while the GOP is doing all the above, the Dems are missing in action. They're committed. They repeat every day to the mantra of bipartisanship. They're offering a hand in friendship to figures who seem like they would truly enjoy doing violence and real harm, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Josh Hawley, and of course, the Trumpist base, who is still firmly behind the failed coup attempt of January 6th. The Dems are not fighting hard enough to save American democracy. That is why survivors and scholars of authoritarianism like me are ringing bells as loudly as we can. This letter that was sent by 100 scholars, I guess he's citing here 80 historians of fascism and authoritarianism, issue open letter of warning. To us, the future is crystal clear, unless there is a serious pushback from the Democrats. The Republicans are likely to succeed in their now overarching goal of bringing American democracy to an end. By the way, I want you to understand that I'm a scholar of authoritarianism and totalitarianism and democracy myself. I've been studying it since I was in undergraduate school, since before, in my second year, okay, of undergraduate school, I was studying totalitarianism seriously as part of my study of the Soviet Union and how it worked at that time. This, for your information, was back in but 1956. It was that long ago. I studied democratic theory and totalitarianism all through undergraduate school. I studied again in graduate school. My PhD thesis was on political conflict and transitions from transitions between authoritarian systems, totalitarian systems, democratic systems, okay, and immobilist systems. That was the focus of my studies of comparative politics. And my PhD was in comparative politics and international relations. I might have signed that letter. I had the background, okay, to do so. I've been working on American democracy and how to save it in the context of a specific project from 2010 to 2018, trying to help to get a system off the ground that is an IT application that would likely save American democracy. So I agree. The Dems are not fighting hard enough to save American democracy. To us, the future is crystal clear unless there is a serious pushback from the Democrats. The Republicans are likely to succeed in their now overarching goal of bringing American democracy to an end. Do Americans really understand the gravity of the situation they now face? It seems, at least to me, as if the infamous words, quote, "it can happen here," still permeate American culture, and it seems that that is the principle and assumption by which the Democrats are operating. Let me put this to you in a less gentle way. Instead of saying to themselves, quote, "my God, it is happening here, we better act now," the Dems seem to be blithely going on by reassuring themselves that it can't happen here, and yet it is happening, at least to anyone with eyes and half a working mind. Which it are we talking about? Let's put all the above more formally. The GOP is hardening, escalating, and retaliating. The moderates have been pushed out. That's one form of hardening. In their place, fanatics such as Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and whatnot have arisen. Another form of hardening. These fanatics are committed 100% to the idea that Republicans should rule the country with an iron fist, even if they are not democratically elected. They're against the idea of consensual democracy. That's escalation. And that burning desire to seize power, whatever the cost, whatever the means, is premised on the big lie that the election was stolen from them. That's retaliation. This pattern of hardening, escalation, and retaliation is what we see as societies are making a final failed transition from failing states through failed states to fascist ones. Yes, we are now looking like we are transitioning from the failing state to the failed state if we cannot act on these Biden programs. And we cannot get a strong vote of confidence for a Congress that he runs and for an administration that he runs, because his administration and his Congress has not been able to get through enough help to the people. The people will view this as a failed government and themselves as living in a failed state, and they will transition to a fascist state. The center implodes. A vacuum is left. The fanatics rush in and impose what American pundits euphemistically call the minority rule, quote unquote, on everyone else. A simple and more accurate way to put all that is just authoritarian fascism. The authoritarian part is, quote, in a working democracy, the people would reject this. The fascist part is this, quote unquote. The people would reject. In America's case, that's a classic textbook cocktail of racial supremacy, piety and faith, the purity of blood. Trump's GOP was a little conflicted about what it wanted America to become. This GOP has no such qualms. It transparently wants America to resemble Iran or North Korea by way of Russia, a place where dissent, like critical theories, are against the law to teach, where women and minorities have few rights, where anyone different is scapegoated for the woes of the average person, and where society is a crusade of ethnic and religious purity and fanatical nationalism. This GOP now wants fascism by way of authoritarianism. Its new wave of rising stars openly champions both parts of that equation, from the authoritarianism of an MJT intimidating and harassing colleagues to the fascism espoused by a Josh Hawley flipping white supremacy salutes just before a coup kicked off. That combination, fascist authoritarianism, is particularly fatal. It's perhaps the single most dangerous way that the societies collapse, the fastest, hardest, and most difficult to fight. It's about one-party rule that cannot be changed, challenged, altered, or fought anymore. This is what 2022 and 2024 are really about. These fanatics, though, haven't just risen at the national, federal level, but at the state level, where they're passing laws to effectively seal in Republican power and render democracy a distant memory, whether by overturning election results like was just attempted in Texas, by gerrymandering like throughout the South through vote audits, like the laughable one being conducted in Florida. The means are being tested one by one at the state level. And as Republicans assume control of states, more or less in perpetuity, taking authoritarian one-party rule, so too the power to manipulate, thwart, and rig the next presidential election is achieved. States can refuse to certify electors. A Republican House can refuse to certify election results, and so on. Not just a Republican House, a Republican Senate. If the states can refuse to certify electors, then if a Democrat is elected in 2024 to the presidency, they can refuse to certify that election, and they can throw the election into the House. And even if they don't have a Republican House in 2024, but based on a one vote per state delegation in the House, they might well have a majority of the delegations from the states. And that's enough to elect a Republican president, even though the Democrat won both the Electoral College vote and the popular vote. The GOP is gearing up for this epic battle. There are so many ways to bring about one-party rule that would effectively end American democracy, that the situation is as grave as it's alarming. The GOP is committed to putting them all together and mounting a multi-pronged attack on American democracy that lasts through this next election cycle. If it succeeds, America will not be a democracy anymore, perhaps one in name, like Russia, but only that. Those are the stakes. They couldn't be higher. Now let's come back to the Dems. They're out there every day begging for bipartisanship, quote unquote. They're extending a friendly hand, looking for a buddy or two. The GOP on the other side is laughing at all this and going right ahead and cooking up poison after poison with which to destroy democracy, combine them, and kill it dead. The Democrats are busy negotiating with a party that wants to end democracy. How do you think that's going to work out? The answer is already clear. It's not working out. Republicans went back on their word and blocked even the investigation of the attempted coup on January 6th. And they used a filibuster to do it, by the way. What's happening here is a typical sequence of social collapse. Going back on your word and playing good cop, bad cop. The Republicans say that they'll toe the line, play along, help get the basic job of governance done. And then when it comes to it, they garrote it. Some of them play good cop with the Democrats, like Kevin McCarthy sometimes, and appear eminently reasonable and willing to think. Then the bad cops come along, the fanatics, and whip the base into a frenzy, and the good cops say, quote, sorry, we can't go along with you, our base doesn't want it, unquote. This is an incredibly foolish game for the Democrats to be playing, and make no mistake, they're playing it, which is the problem. You can't play games with a fanatical political party which is clearly acting in bad faith to begin with. You will only end up A, looking like a fool, B, getting nothing done, and C, wasting precious time, which is exactly what Biden has been doing, while the fanatical other side has figured out how to take advantage of you. And that's exactly what's happening right now. We're now 6 months in, and the Democrats have a fleeting window of power where they control the House presidency and the Senate. 6 months have gone by like that, snap. Well, it's actually only 5. There are just 2 or 3 more such periods left. What have the Democrats accomplished in the first one? Well, they've made minor league progress on their social agenda and floated some plans. They've handled COVID well. Those are basic jobs of governments, though. They shouldn't be hailed as miraculous. It's just somebody doing their job. What the Democrats are failing at is far more ominous than what they've succeeded at is glorious. I just added those last 2 words. They failed to check the GOP at all from hardening, escalating, and retaliating. The extremists and fanatics took over the party. They now own it lock, stock, and barrel. And their plan to destroy American democracy is going amazingly well from their perspective. They're on track to turn America into a one-party fascist state within the next 5 years or so. That's easily manageable enough that you should be able to see how it happens when I say it. States pass laws that hand electoral control to Republican legislators, and they use it basically to overturn the next election. And if that doesn't work, GOP has 2 aces up its sleeve. 1, the Supreme Court. 2, another coup attempt, which its senior figures seem to already be openly calling for. It's a sophisticated plan with multiple layers of redundancy that we're seeing. If I were analyzing it as someone who studies how societies collapse, I'd call it a pretty good plan, one which has a very good chance of succeeding. How, folks, can we live with that? With them having a pretty good plan that has a very good chance of succeeding? We can't live with that. We got to stop it right now, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. The Democrats aren't taking the Republican plan to overthrow American democracy nearly seriously enough. They're operating under the assumption that, quote, it can't happen here, even while the GOP is putting in place blocks of TNT one by one to blow democracy to smithereens on demolition day. The calls for bipartisanship have to end. Are you listening, Joe Biden? Hello, somebody. The Democrats have to begin acting like America's facing the existential crisis that it is. I know that the last few years have been exhausting, but America is not out of the woods yet. It is deeper in them. I know, too, that the Dems have two sharp thorns in their side, Sinema and Manchin. But it's not good enough to use them as excuses for getting little to nothing done in the way of stopping the GOP from ripping up what's left of American democracy. The Democrats have to punish, educate, discipline them, whatever it takes, and achieve true party unity. At least on these basic things the party now has to do. You cannot stop a fascist movement when the opposition to it is so splintered. The reason is obvious. The fascists aren't. The Democrats have to be fully united. They have to be ruthless, smart, tough. They have to be merciless. They have to play hardball and start to make the Republicans political has-beens, social pariahs, and cultural laughingstocks. So far, they're making little to no progress on any of those three fronts. All of that is why the GOP's plan to overthrow American democracy has a very good chance of succeeding. What happens when a sophisticated plan to collapse the democracy and put authoritarian one-party rule in place to create the fascist society meets, quote, it can't happen here, unquote, the bad guys tend to win. That's the situation America's facing. Don't run away from it. Look it right in the eye. Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, Joe Biden, look it right in the eye. You have to stop fooling around. You have to pass H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and the bills the president needs to ensure a Democratic victory in 2022. We can't afford to have either the Senate or the House revert to Republican rule in 2022. We cannot allow that to happen because either way, they will set 2024 up for the Republican coup that is coming. Look it right in the eye. Umair Haque is completely correct. Look it right in the eye. One more piece, because some among us have been acting, others have also been acting stupidly. Not just the people in Congress, and not just the President of the United States. This is Ryan Cooper's piece from the week. Civil war would be bad for business. The Republican Party move against democracy is accelerating. Texas Republicans with temporary blockage vote a suppression bill that would make it easier to overturn election results. But that is almost certainly only a short delay. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn called for a Myanmar-style military coup at a recent QAnon event. Donald Trump is now reportedly saying he will be reinstalled in the presidency in August. He said something like August 9th, didn't he? The utter fecklessness of key Senate Democrats in even acknowledging this threat has been widely noted. Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat of West Virginia, is apparently bound and determined to allow Republicans to block every piece of legislation, including voting rights protections and the commission that would have investigated the January 6th putsch that can't be got through budget reconciliation. But there is another group, even more powerful than Manchin, that is doing little about a clear and present danger to their own position. Big business, as Doug Henwood writes at the Jacobin, while a portion of the capitalist class is firmly behind Republican authoritarianism, the Koch network, innumerable small regional business, a much larger portion is not doing much of anything to push Democrats to shore up democracy or to contest Donald Trump's stranglehold on the GOP. After the January 6th attack on the Capitol, a whole slew of companies announced that they will no longer support politicians that threaten democracy. Thus, when Georgia Republicans swiftly passed the vote suppression bill in response to losing this year's dual Senate runoffs, the Major League Baseball moved an all-star game to Colorado. Delta criticized the law, and so on. Predictably, that promise has been quietly broken as many marquee firms, by many marquee firms, as by Judd Legum reports at Popular Information. Walmart, GE, AT&T, Pfizer, Sanofi, and Oracle all promised that they would no longer donate to politicians who voted to overturn the election, but have since resumed donations to Republican political committees that fund those officials by re-election campaigns. T-Mobile, JetBlue, GM, Ford, Altria, and but Grumman all said they would reevaluate their donation policies after January 6th, but have since restarted direct contributions to Republicans who voted to reinstall Trump. What is going on here? One theory is that big business actually supports Republican one-party rule. They pretend to care. It's a branding exercise, but will gladly overthrow the Constitution in exchange for a tax cut. But this doesn't quite square with the facts. In the first instance, it's not like the Biden agenda is some serious threat to the power of the capitalist class. He proposes some objectively modest tax hikes on business and the rich to pay for some smallish welfare programs and infrastructure spending. It's very far from Franklin Roosevelt's 94% the marginal income tax rate. It's more the kind of moderate class compromise that business in every rich company has accustomed themselves to over the years, and well short of what is normal in most of the European countries. The infrastructure spending, meanwhile, would probably help business on net by making transportation and communication cheaper and more reliable. More importantly, stable political institutions are immensely valuable for capitalists. Business depends on the state at every turn to protect property rights, to operate a legal system and enforce contracts, to sustain a widely accepted currency, to build infrastructure that facilitates commerce, and 100 other things. But neoliberal economists often picture the economy as something that operates by itself, constantly dragged down by meddling regulations. But in reality, without government, there would be no economy and no business at all. No, it would just be Hobbes's state of nature. A developing Republican plot, Donald Trump or someone like him in the White House in 2024 poses a potentially existential threat to the comfortable ride business has gotten from the American government since 1789. With a few exceptions, legitimacy of the American state is based on popular consent, the idea that who governs will be chosen by the people. Obviously, the basic structures of the Senate and the Electoral College violate this principle, but not so much that it is an open fraud. Trump did win with fewer votes in 2016, but he still lost in 2020. So suppose the worst happens and the GOP blatantly steals the election from Biden in 2024. But to assemble an electoral college majority, but Republican controlled states refuse to certify the victory and instead send their own slate of Trump electors to Congress. There can be no legal resolution to that kind of action. Norms, traditions, and laws would quickly dissolve into a question of raw political force. It is not at all out of the question. This could lead to widespread political violence or war. After all, that is what happened last time a conservative minority refused to respect the results of a presidential election. By the way, that was in the Civil War, just before the Civil War. Democrats controlled California, New York, Virginia, and various other states. Biden would remain president during an attempted but fraudulent transition. The military might be forced to choose sides. A shooting war in the streets is generally not great for business. People will slash their spending. Finance and transportation would be hugely disrupted, and the state of the stock market could depend on whether the fascist militias seize control of the New York Stock Exchange or the Federal Reserve. A chaotic economic collapse, instantly reverberating around the world, might quickly follow. So, however remote this possibility, it would be worth spending a great deal of money and effort to try to head it off. Instead, corporations are just blithely continuing their stream of donations to Republicans who are packing dynamite around the political structure capitalists are resting on. They're neither trying to shore up the Democrats by putting pressure on Manchin, for instance, nor trying to wrest control of the GOP from Trump. Henwood is correct to argue that as a class, big capitalists lack wisdom and unity, at least when it comes to confronting the extreme right triumph of the 1980s and 90s, when both parties became capitalist lapdogs. Quote, the focus of business narrowed dramatically to sectoral and even firm-specific issues. Its fragmentation was so complete that it was unable or unwilling to mobilize when a posse of hopped-up reactionary GOP backbenchers shut down the government and threatened default on treasury bonds, he writes. I suspect also that the immense privilege and wealth of the ultra-rich makes them unable to believe that anything bad could really happen to them. Hence the belief that if companies just wait for bad things to blow over, they can return to bribing both parties and everything for them will be fine. It is of a piece with the inability of timid liberals like Manchin to understand how dire the political situation in this country really is. The Trumpist right is backed by smaller capitalists, usually in charge of privately held smaller firms rather than publicly traded ones. I wonder if Ryan Cooper actually realizes that Joe Manchin himself is one of the smaller capitalists, a high-level person and in majority. Somebody is going to have to organize the majority of the American people to defend our democratic institutions. Big business is not going to do it for us. No, we have to look the real situation in the eye, and we have to make Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and Joe Biden all look the real situation in the eye and make that is what has to happen. Your comments, please. I will now consider them. Holly Horn says, no, that's another stream, definitely. Steve Wolfbrand says, I don't think our founding fathers envisioned political parties or filibusters. Where did all shit come from, Doc? Well, when they passed the Constitution, they warned against parties or factions and tried to build in protections against parties and factions. But the fact is their protections were inadequate. They were inadequate from the first. It was a couple of years until things split up into the Jeffersonians and the Federalists. Those were the two initial major parties. Within 2 years of the Constitution being ratified, that happened in the United States. The Founding Fathers did not understand political parties. It's not really so surprising. After all, where were they going to look for models? The only place they could really look to for a model was England at that time, or maybe Switzerland. And they had political parties in those countries. They probably thought they were smarter than those people. They probably thought that they could write a constitution that would protect against political parties and factions. But they didn't realize that when people organize into units, it's a constant fight against emerging hierarchy in whatever unit humans form. It is natural for hierarchies to form. It has to do with the flow of information. That's why you have to build structures where there's continuous circulation of elites, where people are continuously rising from the bottom to take positions of leadership almost on a day-to-day basis. You need structures, you need institutions that facilitate that. But what do our institutions do? They try to stop things coming from the bottom up. They actually have hardened over the years into institutions that freeze the hierarchies. That's why we have oligarchy today. That is why. That's where all the shit came from. Now, filibusters, they came from the failure in the early 1800s to put cloture rules in for debate in the Senate. But it took, 25 to 30 years for John C. Calhoun to take advantage of that and actually introduce the filibuster as a reality in the Senate. Who did that? A slaveholder seeking to protect slavery did that. That's where the filibuster came from. It came from the need to protect slavery against a majority that no longer thought it was right. Steve Wolfbrand said, I never knew we had a parliamentarian until this year, and I'm getting pretty old. They never mentioned the Black Wall Street massacre either. 300 murder, yeah, you mean in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Kay says, but the bigots brought the filibuster, Steve. Not just bigots, slaveholders brought it. Holly Horn said, exactly. The parliamentarian is an advisor. A paid employee, not an elected decision maker, a paid employee. It's like saying that some economic advisor to the Department of Transportation should make the decisions in place of the Secretary of Transportation. No, it's the Secretary's job to make the decisions in the Department of Transportation. It's the Secretary of the Treasury's job to make a decision. Okay, in the Treasury Department, yes, the Secretary of Treasury has advisors all over the place, but they're just advisors. It's Janet Yellen's job to make the decision. Similarly, Chuck Schumer is the majority leader of the Senate. It's his job to make those decisions as to whether the advice of the parliamentarian is going to be taken. It's the job of the president of the Senate, the vice president of the United States, to make the decision as to whether she's going to take the parliamentarian's advice. It's up to each individual senator to make a decision. They're the authorities, not the freaking parliamentarian advisor. Kay says, I wasn't aware of the parliamentarian either, Steve. Kay, is the parliamentarian a relatively new thing? No. The parliamentarian dates from what year? I think it was actually, the parliamentarian was first established sometime during the 1930s as a paid employee. I think the parliamentarian didn't even begin to gain power until reconciliation was put in to create a compromise with respect to the filibuster. And then, of course, the parliamentarian was put in a position to rule on whether the rules of the 1974 Budget Act were being followed. During the 60s, when Senator Humphrey was the president of the Senate, in other words, when he was the vice president of the United States, he was also a former senator, and he knew as well as anybody how the Senate worked. When the parliamentarian gave him advice, he thought, I don't need to take that advice. I've been in the Senate. I don't know how long he'd been in the Senate at that time, at least for 20 years, maybe 25 years. I think he'd been in the Senate since 1948 or something like that. So, there was no way the parliamentarian could know more about the Senate than he could know. So the parliamentarian gave him advice, and he ignored it routinely. We have a similar situation now. Joe Biden was in the Senate from 1972 until 2009 for 37 years. He knows more than Elizabeth McDonough. He's more of an expert. Why does he have to take Elizabeth McDonough's advice? The answer is he doesn't have to. The answer is this whole play act was part of his bipartisan BS. He didn't want to say, we're going to ignore the parliamentarian and ram through the minimum wage bill for $15 an hour because Manchin and Sinema and the Republicans don't want it. So part of being nice and gentle with those people is not ramming through that bill. So how do I justify that? I'm going to say I respect the parliamentarian. Even though I know tons more about the Senate than the parliamentarian would ever know. Steve Wolfram says, complete bullshit, all these weird rules and parliamentarians and filibuster. This is not democracy. This is lawyer bullshit. You got it. You got it. You got it. It's not even lawyer bullshit. It's not law. It's Senate rules. These are not laws. I mean, reconciliation is a matter of Senate rule. That's what it is. It's a way of getting around the filibuster. It's not part of the law. Holly Horn says, at this point, the downturn is ongoing, of course. Kay says, corrupt politics. BS, Steve. And corrupt politics from these newsmen also. Sitting around parroting the frame that the parliamentarian has put an obstacle in front of Joe Biden. She hasn't put an obstacle in front of Joe Biden or Chuck Schumer. She's just given some advice. They choose to take it as an obstacle. They choose to construe it that way because they're playing political games. Steve says, well, congratulations. You must have done a good job raising her. I'm sorry. Done a good job raising who? Steve Wolfbrand said, there are some earlier elections, Doc. Nina Turner and Newsom recall. Yes, there are some earlier elections. However, Nina Turner is going to win. She's in a heavily Democratic district. She has a huge lead in the polls now. She has a huge lead in financial power now. Nina Turner is a shoo-in right now. And she's going to be joining the leftmost people in the House at this time. Kay says, Nina's looking good here in Ohio. She sure is. Kay says, wish I could vote for her, but not in my district. Holly Horn says, Democrats should use their majority. They should, while the using is good. Steve Wolfbrand said, a parliamentarian belongs in a parliament. We don't have that one. Kay says, Cleveland, if we had a parliament and it was a two-party system inside a parliament, the ruling party would do exactly what it wanted it to, and it would tell the minority party to go jump in the lake, as the conservatives have been telling Labor for how many years now? I mean, that's what goes on in a parliamentary system. And the Democrats don't act like they're in a parliamentary system. Kay says, Cleveland used to be one of the greatest cities in the country, but not anymore, sadly. That is where Nina is running, okay, along with Akron. Yes, it used to be a great city. And then the industry was farmed out to Asia. That's what happened to Cleveland. It's what happened to Detroit. It's what happened to the great cities of the Rust Belt. It's what happened to Buffalo. Steve says, Doc doesn't stutter anymore. I miss it. No more bathroom breaks. But during my life, Steve, it has come and gone. Just sometimes it just tends to disappear. The underlying causes are always there. But sometimes, I get it going and it's hardly visible. That's just the way it is. I can't really explain it. Kay says, I just have to live with it. The whole state of Ohio is now in very poor shape. Even Columbus, our capital city. Steve says, I've never heard of reconciliation before. Where's this shit come from and where does it end? Well, I've been talking about reconciliation for months now, Steve. Go back to some of those older live streams. I have some on reconciliation where I thoroughly explain it. Kay says, that's why we need younger people in politics. Evelina says, unless they're like Dr. Joe, laugh out loud. Hi, Kay. Steve says, well, he's young at heart. I'm young in other ways, too. Kay says, hi, Evelina. I'm glad to see you, honey. And Barney floats a heart icon to somebody. Steve says, hello, Barney Firestone. Steve says, next thing you know, the door monitor at the Capitol will be able to shut down the government. Yeah. Maybe we just need a king. Good gig. I'm available, says Steve Wolfbrand. Kay says, this country is so corrupt in too many ways. Evelina says, a reconciliation, such a nice word. If people only knew what it means here. Kay says, exactly, Evelina. It does sound lovely, Evelina. Evelina says, Steve Wolfbrand, the president's job is to reconciliate with the people who are fighting with each other. Carmen says, arg, Hulk, no give damn. Evelina says, so right. People don't care about bipartisan bill. They want soluciones to real problems. Evelina then says solutions. Soluciones was right. Carmen says, if Democrats would have passed that revision reconciliation bill, Republicans would jump out of buildings. Good, good. Make them very high buildings. Steve Wolfbrand said, Biden caved in raising corporate taxes, instead went for a bottom level. Well, I'm told that maybe he did not cave in. But what he's seeking is for Republicans to pass a bill with stuff he wants and stuff that they want. If he gives away on the taxation, he's seeking 10 Republican votes. He's not going to use a reconciliation bill for a compromise infrastructure bill with the Republicans. Supposedly, he's then going to go in and in a reconciliation bill, he's going to raise those corporate taxes because supposedly he can raise those taxes without any Republican votes, just as the Republicans cut them without any Democratic votes. Steve says they named this shit the exact opposite of what it really is. Well, that's Madison Avenue. They all learned from Madison Avenue back in the 40s and 50s. Kay says that is always how it is, Steve. And Steve says, subscribe to Breaking Points on YouTube with Crystal and Sagar. Their new show starts on Monday. Kay says, I already did and can't wait, Steve. Wolfbrand says, love it, Kay. And Steve Wolfbrand said, they don't even read those fucking bills. 3,000 pages. No, they can't possibly read them and understand them because they're so big. They didn't read the Affordable Care Act. They passed it without reading it. And the compromise bills on the budget that were passed with so many pages in them after the fiscal cliff crisis and all that crap, those couldn't be read either. Steve Wolfbrand says, War and Peace is shorter. War and Peace is shorter. Yeah, War and Peace is only a little over 1,000 pages. And Evelina says lawyers write up that crap. Lobbyists write up that crap, both lawyers and lobbyists. They farm it out to the lobbyists to write those bills. That's why the people always get screwed. And that's another effect of reconciliation and another effect of the filibuster. The filibuster stops them from passing very many bills because they have to go through the complex reconciliation procedure. So they can't pass these small, simple bills focused on one subject because they'd be filibustered and they wouldn't be able to get them through. What they do is they wrap all of the bills on one subject into these giant bills. And there's good things for everybody, and there's bad things for everybody. And everybody is forced into a choice. If I want the good things for me and my constituents, I got to swallow hard. And I got to vote for this bill in spite of all the bad things that are there. That's the way they do it. That's the way they get the legislation passed. Epstein was swapped out, Osama as well, who dumps the guy overboard with no pictures. Complete lies. Even when it says too much bureaucracy, that's totalitarianism. No, that's not all that it's about. That can be about a failed democratic state too. Carmen says that's how you knew Trump was Mussolini more than Hitler. I remember you'd always say that. I think Trump is too stupid. Well, I shouldn't say that. Actually, Mussolini was a pretty smart cookie. Hitler was a pretty smart cookie in his way also. Trump was not nearly as bad as either of them because he's not that smart, okay? A cookie. And he can't stick to a plan. He can't stick to a plan. Trump is fueling this transition, but he is not leading this transition. This transition is being led by a Republican Party that wants to end our democracy. He's just giving them cover, putting an attractive figurehead at the head of it all. And they won't care how many crimes he commits or how much looting he does, as long as he enriches them too. There's an article, okay, an alternate that Carmen is linking to here by Steve Schmidt, who is one of the Republicans who's trying to take back the party from the Trumpists. Evelina says it is possible, not far-fetched. And Steve says, Doc, I think you need to pull away and look at the big picture. This lawyer shit is dragging you down. This shit will drive you nuts. Evelina says, Dr. Joe can handle it. Georgia is not going to save us again if the Democrats keep empowering the GQP fanatics with their bipartisan brown-nosing. Steve says, yes, he thrives on it, but you wind up just spinning your wheels. I'm just here to offer some sanity. Thank you, Steve. Steve says, Steve, that's Haiti Howe is going through by deciphering. That's how Haiti Howe is doing through, though, by deciphering and deconstructing language that is hard to follow. Look at it that way. That is what Dr. Joe is doing. Carmen says, Adolf Hitler is about to start his Nuremberg rallies again, placing another fascist pawn in advance. The Republicans are playing chess, but Democrats are playing checkers. I don't think Democrats are playing anything. I mean, they're playing bipartisanship. When are they going to stop? Carmen says, who is that goddess in the background? It was either Bonnie or my daughter, Devora. Our daughter, Devora. It was one of the two. I'm not sure who you saw in the background. Evelyn says, people are not versed in many aspects, but they can perceive deviousness. Kay says, can I still get my measly Social Security if I go to Cuba? I don't know. You could get your measly Social Security if you go to Canada, but of course there are special rules for Cuba because we still got sanctions on. Ghostart says, finally solved PC problems. What did I miss? You missed a bang-up session. Bavada says, hi. Just getting here as was listening to Zoom call with Fadl K on job guarantee. We'll have to play this back from the beginning. I understand, Kay, the job guarantee is very, very important. And normally, if there were no conflict, I would have been there watching that too. But this session was more important than the job guarantee, Kay. And Steve says, Kabubi. Evelina says, but Manchin, a timid liberal, what does he mean? He meant that Manchin is kind of a vaguely liberal guy on some questions. After all, Manchin supports H.R. 1. He wants to see H.R. 1 pass. So he's liberal to that extent. He is liberal in the sense of being a neoliberal. Carmen Muniz says, that explains why Manchin is for the fascists. By Ryan Cooper's article. Yeah, I don't think Manchin is really quite that bad, though. I don't think he is for the fascists. People have been saying that he's going to come over on the filibuster if he can't find the 10 votes, for H.R. 1. There are a number of people saying that. I don't care who's saying it, but I get that feeling, too, that he is going to come around. But he's extremely indecisive about it. Extremely. He loves the filibuster so much. He just can't bring himself to make the decision to give it up. I think once he does, that Kirsten Sinema is going to follow along. Steve says, Evelina Pont turns off all the cameras and the guards fall asleep. Complete bullshit. He's not dead. How fucking stupid do they think we are? Kay says, but Joe Manchin has always been a dino. Yeah, but there are 10 Democrats who are kind of dinos. Maybe 8 anyway, out of the 50 Democrats who are kind of dinos. All those who voted against the Sanders Amendment to put the minimum wage back into the bill. I mean, they're all dinos. I mean, that's a litmus test. To vote against or to vote for keeping the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. I mean, you can't be a real Democrat and think that way. And Lana says, Kabubi, that's hilarious. I don't think Fadl would consider it hilarious. Evelina says, Steve Wolfbrand. I agree. Lana says, George Washington did not like political parties. No. Well, even though George Washington did not want to be king, I think in some ways he was a monarchist. Steve said, Evelina Pont, I respect the doc, just don't want his head to explode. And Evelina says, Steve, it won't, Steve. Laugh out loud. Balana says, our institutions stagnate things. They like things as they are and don't want to change. Bad news. That's right. What Manchin is for is stopping change for as long as he can. Evelina says, would have done long ago. He's a scholar. Steve says, Evelina punt. And Carmen says, Calhoun, Florida is nothing but Klan. That tells you everything right there. Charles C. Calhoun was from South Carolina. Of course, they are nothing but Klan as well. But he was the senator from South Carolina. Oh, so you're telling me that a town called Calhoun, Florida is nothing but Klan. I see. I don't know. I've never been to Calhoun, Florida. But South Carolina is probably nothing but Klan too, right? Kay says Harris is useless. Evelina Pond puts forward an icon that I can't read in this interface. Steve Gonzo says, when you learn that a bill with 66 Senate co-sponsors is being held up by one committee chair, you start to realize that Senate issues go way, way beyond the filibuster. Which bill is being held up by one committee chair? Evelina says, not law, Senate rules. And Carmen Muniz says that Ms. McDonough is a fascist. I don't think she's a fascist. She was appointed by Harry Reid. I don't think she's a fascist. I think she just has a narrow construction of her job. And she doesn't look at her job as being one of providing interpretations that help to get good things passed. She sees her job as being a job of narrowly reading the rules and interpreting them in ways that make sense to her. Kay says, Biden's history is what made me hold my nose. Biden's history in the what? In the Klan? I don't know. Is what in the Senate is what made me hold my nose to vote for him. So he says, apparently they didn't teach us anything in school. No parliamentarian, no reconciliation, no Tulsa massacre. Perhaps I went to the wrong best white schools. Well, which best white schools did you go to? And when did you go to them? In other words, the parliamentarian didn't really become very prominent in the Senate until the 1970s sometime. And even then, not so prominent. Steve Gonza says, all I've heard on the news for the last 2 days is how you're going to pay for it. And the answer is, we're going to pay for it in the same way. It's going to come out of the Treasury spending account. We're going to pay for it in that way. Then let him figure another question out. Okay, the other question is, how are you going to get the money to top up the Treasury spending account when you run out? That's the next question. They got to figure that question out. They think paying for it is different. But paying for it is always the same. It's the Treasury, either sending a wire or writing a check. That's how they pay for it. Carmen says, but Nina Turner might just confront the fascist. She doesn't seem like a sniffling worm to me. Evelina Pot says, laugh out loud. She says, I tagged you earlier with Tim Black's short video on how Manchin cinema deliberately throwing a monkey wrench, in other words, with Biden's permission or maybe even behest. Sounds right. Yeah, I know you tagged me with that. I haven't had a chance to watch the short video. I heard that's what it's about. I don't credit it. Look, Joe Biden wanted to become the president of the United States. Why at 78 was he so intent on becoming the president of the United States? It had to have been because he wanted to do something. It couldn't have been because he only wanted to make the world safe for his donors. Why would a 78-year-old man with $15 million in the bank want to spend his last few years making the world safe for his donors? It doesn't compute. It just doesn't compute. Why wouldn't he want to pass those reconciliation bills? No, you got to come up with better motivation than that. Why would he be in favor of Manchin and Sinema throwing a monkey wrench in? I mean, maybe to facilitate his desire for bipartisanship. But if so, that's going to be temporary. Because he can't keep this bipartisan show on for too many more days. He's gone by his deadline. Everybody's getting really, really angry, really, really annoyed at him. He's got to figure that he's got to cut the bipartisan crap and let Schumer do his thing. And if he is deliberately throwing a monkey wrench in the thing, then you're saying he's got control of Manchin and Sinema. That means he can, at any moment, say to Manchin and Sinema, okay, I can't get the Republicans to be reasonable. We have to go ahead with H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. We have to go ahead with these infrastructure bills. So you guys come around, okay, and let's do it. I'll give you this, I'll give you that, I'll give you the other thing. He can make concessions to them to make their position very comfortable in their states. So, if he is controlling them, as Tim Black is suggesting, then he's got to have control of them. And if he has control of them, then sooner or later, those bills are going to pass. And the infrastructure and the family plan bills are going to pass as well. Steve Day says, throw MMT at them. Okay. Are you a believer, Steve? I've already thrown MMT at them, Steve. The live streams I've done. Kay says, that was Clinton's BS. The both of them ruined the Dem Party. Lana says, soluciones works in any language, haha. Steve says, these people are very enlightened, but some are quite stupid. And Lana says, in the defense of the representatives, they are forced to vote before they have a chance to read through the bills. That needs to change too. It's not going to change until reconciliation goes away. It's not going to change until the filibuster goes away. Then people can write specific bills for specific purposes that they have a chance to read. There will be no need to write 2,000-page bills. I mean, look at H.R. 1976. It's a great bill. It's 130 pages, right? It's not 2,000 pages. It can do everything it has to do in 130 pages. Kay says, Joe Manchin is the only Dem that's backed, okay, by Alec. Yeah. What do they do when Jim Justice runs against Joe Manchin in 2024? Because Jim Justice is not going to step out of the way. He's going to run as the Republican. They still going to back Joe Manchin then? I don't think so. Steve says, I try not to be too divisive, but take a good look at Michelle, then do some research. Oh, there's Steve again. With his usual. Steve, I think you think that poor Michelle is an alien. And Steve Day says, thank you for mentioning Alec. Kay says, my Facebook friends from Greenville are not happy about Rump being in town for the GOP convention tonight. Steve Gunza says, must have been a valid uh, hall pass to bring it to the floor. Must have a valid hall pass to bring it to the floor, yeah. Steve Gonzo says, but Democrats are playing the possum. Which Democrats? Hadlana says, I think it was Devora. Too tall to be Bonnie. Haha. Hadlana says, yeah, I think it was Devora too. Steve says, small channel, big message. Hadlana says, there is some Klan in Florida, central portion for sure. Also in South Missouri. I traveled for work 20 years. The black people we worked with were scared to leave the hotel after dark. It was really awful. And Steve Wolfbrand, I love Henry Reid for UFO research. Henry Reid or Harry Reid? Steve says, Kabubi, very responsible, stable nature. Your calmness of mind enables you to analyze objectively and to make decisions quickly, making it possible for you to do well in business or in any professional capacity. Oh, I see. You have a strong humanitarian nature, and many times you're called upon to assist others with their problem. You are fond of home and children and desire a settled environment, and you have an appreciation for music and art and could express along these lines. Pretty cool. Steve Wolfbrand says, they are here. Aliens. Get used to it. Evelina says, just another tool to manipulate, Steve. Kay says, they won't stay in this corrupt country if they have any brains. Alana says, there has to be some reason Biden isn't reading Manchin and Sinema, the Riot Act. If Tim's idea is wrong, what is going on? I just don't get it. But I think you pretty much answered this. Biden is a creature of the Senate. Okay, Manchin is a creature of the Senate, but a little later in time, okay, than Biden. But they share, in part, okay, a reverence for the filibuster and the customs of that peculiar institution. That's what it is. What Biden believes is that he won't get anywhere if he tries to loudly coerce people to read the Riot Act to people. Now, he's not above the manipulation. He's not above doing things behind the scenes. He's not above making moves that would make them uncomfortable or threaten them. He will do that, but he's only going to come out against them publicly and strongly only as a last resort. And he probably believes he's not going to have the last resort. The whole game he's been playing with the Republicans, some suggest, has been for the purpose of convincing Manchin and Sinema that they will never be reasonable. That especially when it comes to H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, that they will never give way and vote for those bills or develop a compromise on them. So I think that's where he is on that. If he can persuade Joe Manchin, show Joe Manchin that they will not move, that they're bent on destruction, then he can say to Manchin, it's time to pass these bills. Steve Gonzo says illegal aliens stop, do not pass, go directly to jail. Evelina Pont, yeah. But Manchin has never had this much power, and he's loving that power. Evelina says that too. Evelina says, migrations will only increase from here on due to wars and climate catastrophes. Absolutely. Dolores Pierce says, thank you and good night all. Thank you, Dolores. Steve Wolbrand said, can't we just be friends with aliens? I'm not afraid. They seem friendly. Alina says, those are the aliens are coming. And Evelina says, I can assure you the aliens they have in mind will not be friendly. Evelina says, the Pentagon aliens. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham dismissed the protesters who showed up at her re-election campaign announcement as QAnon lizard people, a thing that happened today. Good for Michelle Lujan Grisham. Maybe she's a fighter. Steve Wolbrand said, the phenomenon. Watch the dog. Changey head. Lana says, another comment on Twitter is Biden is holding out for bold programs until midterm about madness time. That might be right as well. I doubt that, and the reason why I doubt that is because he'd be taking a risk that the economy does not tank, okay, between now and then. That's one reason why I think he's not doing that. The second reason why he's not doing that is that Congress hates to pass bills in an election year. He doesn't want to get into the spring of 2022 and not have most of his legislation that he wants actually passed. So that's why I don't credit that. I think he has to pass most of his program between now, okay, and the fall of this year. And I think he knows it. It cannot go into the spring of 2022. Look what happened to Obama when he allowed very critical legislation to fall over into the spring of 2010. He got smashed in the Congress. He got smashed in the state legislatures. And he set up the background for today's attempts to destroy democracy by the Republicans. He did that by being so stupid in 2009. He should have flooded the Republicans with New Deal legislation right then, and he would have been a hero in 2022. The Democrats would have been heroes. Steve Wolbrand says, good night, I'm very tired. Kay says, good night, Steve. Steve Wolbrand says, the aliens could easily kill us if they wanted to. I'm not afraid. And Lana says, aha, thanks for explaining that. Okay, and Lana says, Mike Norman has rung the alarm bells again in the 23 or so states cutting their unemployment benefits. Yep, absolutely. They're cutting their unemployment benefits in part so they can ruin Biden's recovery. So he needs more bills to explode this recovery again. Lana says, benefit early, sorry, it cut me off. Steve is saying, I think aliens are here to help us. Steve, I think that is not the subject of this particular live stream. So I've reached the end of the comments, and I am going to say good night. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. And I will see you on Tuesday. Steve Gonzo says aliens stole the election. Have a great weekend, folks.